There are places where nature quietly hides its secrets. Places where the forest swallows sound, where time seems to stand still, and where the past waits patiently beneath the trees. In November 1985, a hunter wandered off a familiar trail inside Bear Brook State Park, expecting nothing more than another peaceful day in the woods. Instead, something unusual caught his eye. Partially concealed among fallen leaves and undergrowth sat an old rusted steel barrel. It didn't belong there. Curious, he stepped closer. The lid had shifted just enough to reveal what no one was ever meant to see. Inside the barrel were the decomposed remains of an adult woman and a young girl. No identification. No missing person report investigators could immediately connect to them. No explanation for how an entire family had seemingly disappeared without anyone coming forward to claim them. At first, detectives believed they were investigating a single horrific crime. They had no idea the forest was still keeping another secret. When investigators arrived at Bear Brook State Park, they expected answers to come quickly. Crime scenes often tell a story, a name, a missing person report, a witness who remembers seeing someone leave town. But this case offered none of those. The victims carried no identification, no personal belongings that could reveal who they were. And years of exposure had erased many of the clues investigators usually rely on. The adult woman appeared to be in her 20s or 30s, and the second was a young child. Despite extensive efforts, no one could say who they were or why they had ended up inside a steel barrel abandoned deep within the forest. As investigators searched the surrounding area, they hoped the killer had made a mistake. A footprint, a discarded weapon, anything. Instead, they found silence. The forest revealed nothing more. Days turned into weeks. Weeks became months. Missing person databases across the United States were checked. Sketches were circulated. Tips were investigated. Each lead ended exactly where it had begun. Nowhere. It was as though these two persons have vanished from history long before their bodies were found. With no names to pursue and no suspect to question, the investigation slowly began to lose momentum. The barrel remained. The mystery remained. And eventually, time did what it so often does to unsolved cases. It moved on. But 15 years later, the forest would speak again. This time, it would reveal something even more disturbing. 15 years passed. The case had grown cold. Without names, investigators had little to pursue. Leads dried up, memories faded, and the files were quietly stored away alongside countless other unsolved cases. For years, Bear Brook State Park returned to what it had always seemed to be, a peaceful woodland where families camped, hikers explored the trails, and children played beneath towering pine trees. To nearly everyone, the horror discovered in 1985 belonged to the past, but the forest had never given up all of its secrets. In May 2000, investigators returned to the same area of the park. Their search wasn't random. Advances in investigative methods and renewed interest in the case brought them back to the site, hoping that something, anything, had been overlooked. Then, only a short distance from where the first barrel had been found, they noticed another rusted steel barrel hidden among the trees. For a brief moment, there was hope. Perhaps it contained discarded evidence left behind by the killer. Perhaps it held something that could finally identify the two victims. Instead, investigators uncovered something far more disturbing. Inside the second barrel were the remains of 2 young girls. Children. No identification. No obvious connection to the outside world. And once again, there was nothing to explain how they had ended up there. The discovery transformed the investigation overnight. This was no longer a case involving 2 victims. There were now 4. For lives hidden in 2 barrels. For people whose names has vanished. Investigators immediately faced a troubling question. Had all 4 victims been killed at the same time? Or had someone returned to Bear Brook more than once, believing the forest would keep their crimes hidden forever? Every new possibility led to another mystery. If the children in the second barrel were related to the woman found in the first, why hadn't anyone reported them missing together? If they weren't related, then who were they? And how had 5 people disappeared without leaving a trail anyone could follow? The deeper investigators looked, the stranger the case became. The barrels weren't just hiding victims. They were hiding identities. And somewhere beyond those unanswered questions was a man who had spent years making sure the truth stayed buried. Who were these 4 people? And why couldn't anyone tell investigators their names? The answer wouldn't come from eyewitnesses. It wouldn't come from fingerprints. And it wouldn't come from traditional detective work. It would require a breakthrough that didn't even exist when the first barrel was discovered. For victims, 2 barrels, and not a single name. For investigators, this wasn't just frustrating, it was deeply unusual. Most homicide investigations begin with one simple question. Who was the victim? Because once a victim is identified, their life begins to tell a story. Friends can be interviewed. Family members can be located. Employers, neighbors, and classmates can help reconstruct the final days before disappearance. But at Bear Brook, there was no story to follow. The victims seemed to exist only in death. No one reported an adult woman missing alongside 3 children. No missing person case matched the victims' descriptions. No family came forward searching for them. It was as though they had vanished long before anyone realized they were gone. Investigators carefully examined every piece of evidence they had. The clothing, the jewelry, the condition of the barrels. Every small detail was documented, photographed, and preserved. Forensic artists worked tirelessly to reconstruct what the victims might have looked like while they were alive. Composite sketches were released to the public. Their faces appeared on television broadcasts, in newspapers, and on missing person bulletins across the country. Officials hoped someone would recognize a smile, a hairstyle, a familiar face from years ago. But the calls that came and led nowhere. Months became years. Years became decades. As technology improved, investigators revisited the evidence again and again, refusing to let the case disappear. Each new forensic technique brought hope. Each new examination raised the same painful question. Who were they? The mystery weighed heavily on everyone involved. Not only because a killer remained unidentified, but because 4 human beings had lived entire lives that investigators couldn't reconstruct. Someone had celebrated their birthdays. Someone had tucked those children into bed. Someone had known their laughter. Yet somehow, no one knew their names. Or so it seemed, because hidden inside the evidence was a clue investigators didn't yet understand. One that would quietly reshape everything they believed about the victims. Investigators believed they were searching for 4 unrelated identities. They were wrong. The answer had been hidden inside the victims themselves all along. And when DNA technology finally caught up with the evidence, it revealed a family connection no one had expected. For years, investigators worked under one assumption: that the victims of Bear Brook were strangers to one another. An adult woman, 3 young children, unconnected, unexplained. But the evidence, when examined more closely, began to suggest something else entirely. Something far more structured, far more deliberate, and far more personal. It started with DNA, not the kind that simply identifies a person, but the kind that reveals relationships. When forensic genealogy techniques were applied, investigators stopped searching for names. Instead, they searched for connections. And what they found changed everything. The victims were not random. They were linked, not just by circumstance, but by blood, which meant the question investigators had been asking for decades was wrong. It wasn't, who were they? It was, who was connected to all of them? Somewhere in the background of this case, there was a man who appeared only in fragments. Different names in different places, different identities in different states. No consistent record, no clear history, just patterns of disappearance and reappearance. Each time investigators followed a lead, they found something unsettling. People who knew him as someone else. To some, he was a quiet drifter. To others, he was a family man. To others still, he was someone who never fully explained where he came from. But the most disturbing detail was not his behavior. It was his ability to disappear completely and reappear under a new name, each time leaving less behind, and each time getting closer to the Bear Brook timeline. But even then, investigators still didn't know what they were looking at, because a man with multiple identities is not unusual in cold cases. What was unusual was what DNA was about to reveal about his connection to the victims. When the genetic profiles of the victims were fully mapped, a pattern emerged that investigators did not expect. The relationships were not accidental. They were structured, intentional, and they pointed toward one central figure who had been present in their lives long before they were ever found in the barrels. At this stage of the investigation, they still did not know his real identity, but they now knew something far more important. He was not just connected to the case. He was embedded inside it, and every identity he had ever used was beginning to collapse under the weight of a single truth. Because once investigators finally broke through the layers of aliases, they would uncover something they never expected. A man who didn't just hide his identity. He rebuilt it, again and again, until the truth of who he was became almost impossible to recognize. For nearly 20 years, the Bear Brook case remained frozen in time. Investigators had names for their frustration, but not for their victims. Every traditional method had failed. Fingerprints, dental records, missing person reports, witness testimony. Nothing connected, nothing matched. And slowly, the case became something investigators rarely admit out loud. A case without a future. But while the case grew colder, science was moving in the opposite direction. Something new was emerging in forensic investigation. It wasn't just about identifying a person anymore. It was about identifying their family. This shift changed everything. Because even when a victim has no name, their DNA still carries something far more powerful. A history, a lineage, a connection to people who are still alive. This approach became known as forensic genealogy. Instead of searching databases for a direct match, investigators began building family trees backwards, piece by piece, relative by relative, generation by generation, until eventually the identity of the unknown could be reconstructed, not through records, but through biology itself. When investigators applied this method to the Bear Brook victims, they weren't looking for one answer. They were looking for 5. And what they discovered first was not names. It was relationships. The victims were not strangers. They were connected. Somehow, they were part of the same family structure. This changed the entire direction of the investigation, because now investigators were no longer asking, "Who are these people?" They were asking something far more specific. Who in this family never came forward? And that question led them closer to a single individual, a man whose identity had been shifting for decades, a man who appeared in records under different names, in different states, with no consistent history tying him to any one life. At first, he didn't look important. He looked like noise in the data, just another fragmented identity in a cold case timeline. But as the family tree expanded, something disturbing became clear. All of the genetic paths, all of the missing links, all of the unanswered connections were pointing in one direction, toward him. Investigators were now close. Closer than they had ever been. But even then, they still didn't know exactly who he was. Because forensic genealogy doesn't reveal names instantly. It reveals probability. It narrows the world until only a few explanations remain. And at the center of those explanations was a man who had built his life on disappearing. And when investigators finally broke through the final layer of identity, they uncovered something far more disturbing than they expected. Because the man connected to the Bear Brook victims wasn't just hiding from the law. He had been hiding from the truth of who he was to them. For more than 20 years, the victims of Bear Brook had no names. No birthdays to be remembered, no school records to revisit, no families able to say where they had gone. Just case numbers, photographs, and questions that grew heavier with time. But forensic genealogy does not simply narrow possibilities. It eliminates impossibilities. And when investigators finally completed the genetic mapping, the truth began to surface. The adult woman was identified, then the children, then the second group of victims. One by one, the names returned, and with them, their histories, their families, their places in the world. What had once been an anonymous collection of remains became real people again. But identifying the victims did more than answer one question. It created another. Because now investigators could trace their final known connections. And those connections led to a man who had been present in their lives, long before they were found in Bear Brook State Park. A man who had used multiple names, multiple identities, multiple versions of himself, but who in reality was only one person. When his true identity was finally confirmed, the picture became unmistakable. He was not a stranger to the victims. He was not a random killer. He was the one consistent presence across fragmented records, across states, across years of deception. And once his identity was fully reconstructed, the final piece of the Bear Brook puzzle clicked into place. The man investigators had been searching for was Terry Petter Rasmussen, a man who had lived under multiple names for decades, a man whose history spanned across states and families, leaving behind confusion wherever he went. And now, he was directly linked to the Bear Brook victims. But even this revelation did not bring immediate justice. Because Rasmussen himself was already dead, there would be no trial, no confession, no confrontation, only the slow, painstaking work of reconstruction, carried out years after the crimes were committed. What investigators ultimately concluded was not just the identity of a killer, but the scale of deception he had maintained for most of his life. A life built on false names, false histories, and relationships that left entire families searching for answers that never came. And for the families of the victims, the truth arrived too late for justice in a courtroom, but not too late for something else. Their names were finally returned. Their stories were finally acknowledged. And after decades of uncertainty, they were no longer unknown. The Bear Brook case did not end the moment the bodies were found. It ended when science finally caught up to silence, when DNA turned fragments into identities, and when decades of unanswered questions finally became answers. For investigators, it was a breakthrough.
With the Reed connection now known, we were able to confirm that the birth certificate listed Pepper Reed and Terry Rasmussen as Ria's parents.
For families, it was closure. And for forensic science, it became a turning point that changed cold case investigations forever.